they had the same amount of rain as for the whole month, which should have been for the whole month.
Really? Yeah, listen,
Yeah.
I mean, it was non-stop. It was pouring.
Yeah. Hello, Stephen.
Thank God for the rain, but often when there's so much, it comes with its own challenges. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you, Stephen?
Okay, hi, Steve. Okay, I'm going to share the screen. We're going to get started. We have gone past 1 o'clock. I guess those who are still yet to join will get here as they do. So let me get here. We want to do this.
I was on mute. Hello, Rabbi. Hello, David.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, can you see that? Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And there we go. Keilim chapter 21. Let me make that a little bit bigger. Sometimes that helps. There you go. If I do that, do you see a picture now?
Yes.
I'm going to come back to that picture in a minute. Okay. So let's begin. So it's chapter 21. We've been talking about laws of vessels that can contract tumah. 2 points to as introduction to this chapter. What we're speaking about previously was like extraneous aspects to a vessel, like a handle that is beyond what is essential to the vessel, and whether or not it contracts tumah once the vessel becomes tameh, or whether or not tumah will transfer from it onto the vessel, and that's depending. So we're talking about that concept, but when it comes to clothing, because when we talk about vessels, it includes clothing as well. And that's the subject of today's chapter. Those extensions of clothing or garments, when and to what degree do they either are they receptive to tumah, that the main thing comes gets contracted, or when will they transfer tumah back to the rest of the vessel? Okay, so different types of garments and different types of tumah, and we'll see how it applies. Halacha 1: the strands that emerge from the weave and those at the beginning of the sheet of fabric and at its ends are called nimin. Okay, so if there's like strands that come off a woven garment or similar, those strands are called nimin. And now the question is, until what measure are they considered as part of the fabric? Like part of the garment, or when is it considered extraneous? So for a sheet and for a head covering and a scarf or a veil, we talk about 6 finger breadths. That means the first 6 finger breadths at the edge of the garment are considered part of the garment. For a cloak, I must be honest, I'm not certain exactly what type of garments these are in modern terms. We'll get a sense of the different principles here, but I can't tell you exactly for specific types of garments. Some of these are garments that were, regular in the times of the Rambam or the Mishnah and so on, but we may not have equivalents today. I'm not exactly sure. But so he talks about different types of garments, right? A head covering, a scarf, a veil, and for a cloak that is open across its entire length, that would be more similar to like our shirts, when a shirt that closes, it's open all the way, and then it closes with loops, or like we have closes with buttons, right? So then the measure of its strands, so here you're talking about where the strands, if I understand it correctly, were actually used to loop the garment close together. So then he says those strands, the length that is considered part of the garment would be up to 10 finger breadths, a little bit longer. I guess because it's more essential to the function of the garment as opposed to the other types of garments, the sheets that we spoke of earlier. So only 6 finger breadths would be considered part of the garment. What about other garments like a thick blanket, a mantle, a cloak? Then it's 3 finger breadths, because I guess the strands that go beyond it are less essential. So it's only that which is much closer to the actual garment itself that would be considered part of the garment. Now, even if the garment is impure due to the impurity of a zav, or because of another form of impurity, if one touches a strand beyond these measures, you remain pure. And the idea of emphasizing the impurity of a zav, or what we call tameh midras, is because that type of tumah is, as we've learned previously, is what we call an av hatumah. It's a primary source of impurity, as opposed to a rishon or a sheni, because we know as we go down on the levels of impurity, the less intense they are and the less they transfer. So he's saying in this instance, even if it was a type of impurity that the article itself would be considered av, it only extends to the length that we're speaking about here, not beyond it. Needless to say that if impurity touched the additional portion, the garment does not contract impurity. So just as if the garment came in contact with impurity, it would not extend beyond the length of those threads or whatever it is. Similarly, if those threads touch something impure, it would not transfer onto the garment to make the garment impure. Okay, there is no minimum measure for the strands that emerge from a head covering. Okay, so I guess here we're talking about a type of garment where the threads are considered mamish part of the garment. So there, any amount would still be tameh. Similarly, a mask worn by the Arabs that cover their faces, or another type of garment. Again, I'm not familiar exactly what these garments are, but a belt made of goat's hair. It seems like this is something that was actually worn on the skin, and somehow maybe it's tassels that are considered more part of the garment than the previous examples, or undergarments worn by a person close to one's flesh, or a handkerchief and a curtain placed over an entrance like a drape. So those type of garments, any length is considered part of the garment and would be receptive to the tumah of the garment, or would transfer tumah to the garment if it came into contact with tumah. Mishkolis is a plumb line. When you got like a metal weight that is attached to a string, you'd either use it to measure the depth of water, or use it to check the how straight a vertical wall is. So he says when a plumb line contracts impurity, so now how much of the string that it's attached to is considered connected. So he says 12 handbreadths of its strand are considered as joined to it. Anyone who touches a portion beyond 12 handbreadths would be pure. Now that's a general plumb line that one would use, I guess, in their own home improvements. But a plumb line of a carpenter, so this is a specialized one, is 18 handbreadths. It's used for bigger projects, and a special one, then it extends up to 18 handbreadths of this string. And if it was a builder's one that was used for large structures, up to 50 amot, a cubit, would be considered connected to the plumb line and therefore would become tameh or transferred to it. One touches any portion beyond these measures in the different types of plumb line, even if the owner desires that it be preserved, he is pure. In other words, if you had a builder's plumb line, which has 50 amot, but its total length is 100 amot, and you don't plan on cutting it off, it's for you, it's part of your tool. Nonetheless, halachically, only up to the 50 cubits would the tumah transfer, not beyond that. Plumb lines used by roofers and artists are impure regardless of their length. Okay, so again, it's exactly what the difference between one and the other is. I'm not 100% sure, but it was how it was used and how integral the line is considered as part of the weight itself, and each different type of plumb line would be judged accordingly. Halacha 5. Now, so this is the image I wanted to show you, because this is how I understand what the Rambam is talking about. So it's a handheld scale. So there's this solid bit here, there's this solid bit here, and then there's the chains that hold these cups, as it were. But then if you look above here, there's a string that's attached to this vertical piece. This is the string that we're talking about in this halacha. Okay? So the length of the chain of a scale of goldsmiths, an ordinary balance scale, or a scale used by those who weigh precious purple cloth, which is held by the seller, suspending the scale from his hand, is 3 finger breadths. Again, we're talking about this string at the top here. So 3 finger breadths is considered part of the scale. Above that is no longer, even though it would be or could be longer than 3 finger breadths, right? Its horizontal beam and its strings have no specific length. So in other words, this horizontal beam and these strings are part of it completely. These are not considered separate. It's only this top string here that is separate that we're talking about. The length of a chain of the scale of sellers of scrap metal and the like is 3 handbreadths. This is obviously a larger scale. It's something which you'd have larger things. So the amount of string, which you generally hold higher, is extended to be, an extended amount of string is considered part of the actual thing. Again, its beam and its strings are 12 handbreadths. The length of the chain of a scale used by merchants and homeowners is a handbreadth. Its beams and its strings are 6 handbreadths. The length of the chain of a scale used by wood merchants and those who weigh glass is 2 handbreadths. Its beams and its strings are 9 handbreadths. Anything more than these measures is not considered as joined to the scale. Okay. The halacha 6, when is the cord used to tie the supports for a bed considered to be joined to the bed? So here we're talking about if you've got a frame and you basically creating like something that the mattress is going to sit above, on top of, by putting string across the bed. Okay. So he says when one ties 3 squares, so I guess now 3 is enough. Now you've got string that creates 3 segments on the bed. That's enough to hold a mattress. So once you've tied three squares, then that length of rope is considered part of the bed. Okay, so when it touches the cord from the point where it is tied and inwards is impure. It's part of the bed. So we're talking about an instant where the bed was now impurity touched the bed. So the impurity now extends to this rope or cord that you're using to create this, I don't know what you would call it, but the netting, as it were, that you put the mattress upon. Now, what about anything that extends beyond? So he says for 3 finger breadths, the length of the cord on the outside of the knot is impure because that measure is necessary for the knot and is considered as part of the bed. Anything outside the 3 finger breadths is pure because it's not necessary for the kli. It's extraneous. And how do I know it's extraneous? Because even if you would cut it off, the knot wouldn't become undone and it wouldn't weaken the knot in any way. Furthermore, he says, when a person touches a cord extending out from the bed that is impure, so the bed's impure and the cord's now extending, he says until the end of 4 handbreadths, he's pure. Now it's from the end till the 4 handbreadths, touching that, not a problem, even if the bed itself is impure. And he says the rationale is that this measure is not considered as necessary for the bed. So it's just considered as a hangover. It's extraneous because it's not fit for any purpose. But now this is interesting. If the string's longer, then he says from the 5th handbreadth until the 10th handbreadth, you would be impure. Why? Because a string that is between 5 and 10 handbreadths, that's a cord that would be used sometimes to tie the bed if you are hanging it from the wall. So now all of a sudden, it has a function necessary for the bed and is considered an extension of the bed, not extraneous to the bed. But then once you get beyond 10 handbreadths, he is pure because it's more than what is necessary for the bed. Again, I'm not 100% clear exactly what the situation is, but obviously there was ways they would tie the beds to the wall. That length was something that was necessary to tie. Beyond it was too much. Less than that was too little. The point is, if it serves as a function for the bed itself, then it would be tamei in that length. If it's too short to be functional or too long to be functional, the tumah does not extend to it because it's simply considered as something extra. Halacha 8, the woven band tied around the bed to enforce the connection between its components is called a mizran. We're talking about tying something to hold the frame together. So the following rule applied with regard to the portion that extends outside the bed. Okay, so it's holding the bed, and now there's extra length to this cord. So he says for 10 handbreadths, it is considered as necessary for the bed. Anything more than that is not necessary for the bed. When the mizran has worn out, this particular band, right? If 7 handbreadths of it, even enough to make a girdle for a donkey, remain, it is susceptible to impurity. Halacha 9, when a bed was impure because it served as a support for a zav, and a portion of its mizran protrudes from it for 10 handbreadths, it is a primary source of impurity like the bed itself. That's what he's emphasizing. It's this mizran that we spoke about and this band that goes around the bed to hold it together and the extended part of it, it's so much part of the bed that it's considered like the av hatuma if a zav sat on it, okay? Just like the bed itself. Everything is considered as a support to which the zav imparted impurity. But beyond 10 handbreadths, the extra portion of the mizran is impure like an object was touched by a support which the zav imparted, meaning it will become a rishon of tumah. Now, when a zav steps, so what happens if a zav steps on the extension of mizran? So if he steps on the first 10 handbreadths, knows the 10 handbreadths closest to the bed, then the entire bed is considered as a support for the zav, and it becomes that level of impurity. If he steps on a portion outside of the 10 handbreadths, then the bed itself doesn't become impure. With regard to what does the bab apply, that's with regard to the impurity stemming from serving a support for a zav. Okay? You know, there's a tumah midrash, but other types of tumah, with regard to other types of impurity, even 100 cubits is considered as attached to the bed. When you got a mizran that extends and other types of impurity touch the extension of it, other types of impurity will make the bed tamei. What are other types of impurity? What are examples? He says, if you had a mizran that's around the bed, and one brought its end into a structure, let's say the rest, you brought it into a structure where there was a carcass, or crawling animals touched it, or impure liquids fell upon it. So it's a lesser degree of tumah than the tamei midras of the zav, but it is infected with that tumah by a greater length of cord. Okay? That's what he says. Even if the end of the Mizran, that contracting period is 100 cubits away from the bed itself contracts that impurity. We see this time and again. There's the intensity of impurity, and then there's the medium through which it is passed, and the different equations of how these things work together. So now we're saying that with regard to the heightened level of tumah, a lesser amount, only a closer part of the extended rope would have infect the bed, but for a lesser intense tumah, a further length would still infect the bed. Halacha 10. When a bed was impure because it was used as a support for a zav. So in the above instances, we're talking about where these things were already tied on the bed, and then either the tamei touched the bed or the extended rope, and we've discussed what happens. Now he's talking about what happens if you had a bed that is already impure, and now you put the mizran around it. So he says everything contracts that impurity. The entire mizran contracts that impurity. But now what is if you separate them afterwards? So then he says the bed will retain its original status. So if it was an avatuma because a zav had leaned on it, it remains an avatuma. But the mizran is considered merely an object that touched the support for the zav. So as long as it's on the bed, it has the same status as the bed. But if it's separated, because it wasn't there together initially, it's just considered like something that had touched a tamei midras and is a second degree of tumah, not the primary source of tumah anymore. If the bed had contracted impurity, that lasts 7 days. So that was an example of where it became a tamei midras. What happens if the bed itself came in contact, for example, with a corpse, which is the 7 days of impurity? Now you wind this band around it, so everything contracts that impurity. And if but then let's say you separate it again, the bed retains its original status, but the mizran is only impure until nightfall. It's a lesser level. And if the bed was impure until nightfall and one wound the mizran around it, everything contracts that impurity. But if you separate afterwards, the bed retains its original, but the mizran is pure, meaning because we're talking about a lesser intense tumah, which doesn't actually transfer. It's just so long as it's part of the bed, it's considered to have the tumah. Once you separate it, it's considered something that had touched that lesser level of impurity, and therefore itself is not impure. Halacha 11. If there was a mizran, again, this band that you used to hold the components of the frame of the bed together, wound around the bed, and a human corpse touched them. So now they're together, right? Everything contracts impurity the last 7 days. If they are separated, they both remain impure for that time, because they both, even though it's separated, it contracted it at the same time. If the carcass of a crawling animal or the like touched them, again, they contract impurity that lasts until nightfall, and it would be for the same thing. Even if they're separated, they're impure for that amount of time. Final halacha 12, when a bedpost, so here a bedpost is like a leg of the bed, or a primary component of the bed's necessary structure, but it was separated from the bed, and it came into contact with a zav, for example, and now you put it back on the bed, okay, and the bed itself was pure. He says now the entire bed is considered such a support. So you had a leg of the bed that the zav leaned on. It wasn't attached to the bed. It now is an avatuma. You now put it onto the bed. Because the bed is only a bed because that's there, because without it, it doesn't stand as a bed, the whole thing now is considered an avatuma. If they were separated afterwards, the bedpost retains its original status, and the bed is impure because of contact with such a support. The theory is the same. The thinking is the same as what we had with his mizran previously. It's just a different example, where something that was considered minor now is a major contribution when the bed's on it. But when you take it away, the bed is only considered something that touched it and not it itself. Similarly, if a bedpost that had contracted impurity that lasted 7 days was connected to a bed, then the entire bed is impure for 7 days, as if a corpse had touched the bed itself. So much so that if one sprinkles the ashes of the red heifer on the bed, it's not directly on the leg, but it purifies everything, the bed and the bedpost, because it's considered one thing. If the bedpost was separated from the bed before the ashes of the red heifer was sprinkled, then the bedpost retains its impurity of 7 days and would need to be sprinkled. But the bed itself is only impure now till evening because it's like something that had touched that rishon. If a bedpost that was impure until the evening was connected to a bed, everything is impure until the evening. If the bedpost was separated from the bedpost retains the original status, and the bed is pure. For an article that is impure until the evening, as a derivative of impurity stemming from a corpse, does not impart further impurity, neither to the person or to a cleave, because it is merely a derivative, as we've explained previously. Similar laws will apply to a tooth of a plow that contracted impurity from a corpse and was then joined to the plow. So long as it's joined, the plow is considered one thing. If you take it away, it's no longer, and they would have two distinct considerations for the level of impurity. Okay, let's make that a little bit smaller so you can see the quiz on the page, and let's see how we do here. First question: when a garment is impure, do the strands that come out from the end impart impurity to one who touches them? We've got three options. Yes, regardless of how long the extra strands extend from the garment. Yes, but only to a certain length, and it depends on the garment. No, they are regarded as being completely separate from the garment.
Number two.
Number two is correct. Okay, as we learned, different types of garments, different lengths, but it's not a given. Yeah. If a bedpost that had contracted impurity that lasts 7 days was connected to a bed, does the bed also contract that level of impurity?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
as we say, because it's
Yes.
essential. It makes the bed into a bed, basically. Now, in the case of the previous question, so you have the bedpost, then you put it onto the bed. What's the law if the ashes of the red heifer were only sprinkled on the bed, but not on the bedpost? Do you need to separate it and sprinkle the bedpost, or does that sprinkling, is that sufficient for both?
Is sufficient.
Shkach, right, correct. It is sufficient.
Yes.
Meaning, even if you were to separate them, you would only require sprinkling for the bedpost and not the bed. Nonetheless, so long as they are connected, they're one status, and therefore the purification process includes all of it. And that's the novelty here, right? That if you would have separated them, you would have only had to sprinkle the bedpost and not the bed, and yet here you're sprinkling the bed, and it purifies also the bedpost. And that emphasizes that they become one thing so long as they're connected. Okay, and in that same scenario, the bed was separated from the bedpost before they were sprinkled upon. What is the law? They both need to be sprinkled separately. I kind of gave the answer already. The bed is impure until the evening, the bedpost retains its original status, meaning it would require sprinkling, or the bed is pure right away and the bedpost retains its original status.
Number two.
Yeah, correct. Okay, because that's something that they come into contact with.
Thanks, Rabbi. Cheers,
Final
everyone.
four, Yeshikaf. Good to be back. Nice to see everyone.
Right.
Thanks for learning together. Stephen,
Thanks.
David, and Kent.
Rabbi.
And Bezrat
Thank you.
Hashem. Next week, we'll see you.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thanks,
Rabbi.
Thanks. Cool.